It's a story that defies everything we think we know about survival at sea. What happened on the luxury yacht? Serenity's Dream asterisk in the Pacific Ocean rewrote the textbooks on maritime disasters. For 3 decades, marine investigators, psychologists, and the sailing community have been haunted by one question. How did a 19-year-old college student survive 47 days alone on a life raft when 5 experienced sailors perished in the same accident? The answer, revealed in a deathbed confession that sent shockwaves through the maritime world, will challenge everything you believe about human nature when pushed to its absolute limits. This isn't just another tale of survival against impossible odds. This is the story of Sarah McKinnon, whose rescue in 1993 was hailed as a miracle of human endurance and divine intervention. But what she revealed 30 years later in a handwritten letter that surfaced only after her death exposes a truth so dark that it forces us to confront the terrifying question, what would you do to survive? What lines would you cross when death is staring you in the face, and the only thing standing between you and the abyss is a decision that will haunt you forever? Every sailor needs to hear this story because it reveals something profound about the human psyche when stripped of civilization, comfort, and hope. It's a reminder that the greatest dangers at sea aren't always the storms, the sharks, or the endless horizon. Sometimes the most dangerous thing on a boat is the person sitting right next to you. Sarah McKinnon was just 19 years old when she answered a Craigslist ad that would change her life forever. A sophomore at UC San Diego studying marine biology, she had grown up sailing the waters off Coronado Beach with her grandfather, a Navy veteran who had instilled in her both a love for the ocean and a healthy respect for its power. She wasn't looking for adventure when she responded to the posting about a crew position on a luxury yacht heading to French Polynesia. She was looking for research experience and maybe enough money to help pay for her next semester. The yacht belonged to Dr. Marcus Rothwell, a 62-year-old cardiologist from Beverly Hills who had spent the last 5 years preparing for his dream circumnavigation. Serenity's Dream asterisk was a magnificent 58-foot Hallberg Rasse, a Swedish-built yacht known for its strength and seaworthiness. Dr. Rothwell had purchased it new in 1989 and had spent over $200,000 in modifications and upgrades. Every piece of safety equipment imaginable was aboard. Satellite communication systems, emergency beacons, multiple life rafts, enough food and water for 6 months, and a medical bay that would make some small hospitals jealous. The crew doctor Rothwell assembled was impressive. There was Captain James Morrison, a weathered 54-year-old who had been sailing professionally for over 30 years and had completed 2 solo circumnavigations. Morrison was the kind of captain other sailors spoke about with reverence, a man who could read weather patterns like others read newspapers, and who had never lost a crew member or a boat in 3 decades at sea. Then there was Elena Vasquez, 41, a mechanical engineer from Long Beach who served as the boat's engineer and navigator. Elena had grown up in a family of fishermen in Baja California and could fix anything that moved, floated, or ran on electricity. Her technical expertise was legendary among the sailing community. The first mate was David Chen, 35, a former merchant marine officer who had left the commercial shipping world to pursue his passion for sailing. David was methodical, careful, and had an almost supernatural ability to sense trouble before it manifested. His colleagues sometimes joked that David could find potential problems in a glass of water. Finally, there was Rebecca Becker Morrison, Jimmy's 28-year-old daughter, who served as the boat's cook and medic. Becca was a registered nurse who had taken a leave of absence from her job at Cedars-Sinai to join her father on what they both knew would likely be his final major voyage. This was not a crew of weekend warriors or inexperienced dreamers. These were professionals who had collectively sailed over 2 million nautical miles. The fact that Dr. Rothwell had convinced them all to join his expedition spoke to both his financial resources and his serious commitment to doing things the right way. The preparation for the voyage had taken Dr. Rothwell 5 years and consumed most of his savings from a successful cardiology practice. He had attended every sailing school imaginable, practiced celestial navigation until he could plot a position using a sextant with accuracy that rivaled GPS systems, and taken wilderness first aid courses. The Serenity's Dream Asterisk had been completely refitted 6 months before departure, with every system upgraded to exceed manufacturer specifications. Sarah felt incredibly fortunate to have been selected for this expedition. Dr. Rothwell had received over 300 applications for the single crew position, but Sarah's combination of sailing experience, academic background in marine biology, and her grandfather's glowing recommendation letter had set her apart. The departure from San Diego on March 15, 1993, was perfect. Light winds from the northwest, calm seas, and a weather forecast showing a stable high-pressure system extending all the way to Hawaii. For the first 3 weeks, the voyage was everything Dr. Rothwell had dreamed it would be. The Serenity's Dream Asterisk performed beautifully, averaging over 150 nautical miles per day. The crew worked together with seamless coordination that comes from having true professionals aboard. Sarah quickly found her place in the routine, standing watches, helping with sail changes, and maintaining detailed scientific observations. The days fell into a comfortable rhythm. The Pacific lived up to its name during those early weeks, providing gentle swells and steady trade winds. Dolphins regularly played in the boat's bow wave, and Sarah spent hours photographing and cataloging the marine life they encountered. The first signs of trouble appeared on April 7th, their 23rd day at sea. Sarah noticed it first during her morning watch, a subtle change in the rhythm of the swells that suggested something large and distant was affecting the ocean's surface. Captain Morrison confirmed her observations when he came on deck, his weather eye immediately picking up the subtle signs that Sarah had noticed. By evening, the seas had increased to 8-foot swells and the wind had shifted. The change wasn't dramatic enough to alarm anyone, but it was significant enough for Morrison to make the decision to reduce sail area as a precaution. That decision probably saved their lives during the next 48 hours, as the weather system intensified into what meteorologists would later classify as a bomb cyclone. By April 9th, they were dealing with 30-foot seas and sustained winds of 45 knots, with gusts reaching 60. The Serenity's Dream Asterisk handled the conditions beautifully, exactly as her designers had intended. Sarah had never experienced anything like it, but she was amazed to discover that she wasn't afraid. The boat felt solid beneath her feet. The crew was competent and calm, and she found herself exhilarated rather than terrified. By April 11th, the storm had passed, leaving behind confused seas and a crew that was exhausted but triumphant. They had successfully weathered their first real test, and the experience had bonded them into a tight-knit team. The Serenity's Dream Asterisk had suffered no significant damage, and all systems were functioning normally. The next 10 days were a return to the peaceful sailing they had enjoyed during the first part of the voyage. But it was during this period of calm that Sarah first began to notice something subtle but troubling about the crew dynamics. The storm had revealed certain personality traits that hadn't been apparent during the easy sailing. Dr. Rothwell had shown a tendency to panic during stressful moments. Elena had become increasingly controlling about the boat's mechanical systems. David had begun to show signs of stress from feeling responsible for everyone's safety. On April 22nd, Their 38th day at sea, they encountered their second major weather system. This storm proved to be more prolonged than the first, lasting nearly a week and featuring confused seas that made progress nearly impossible. For 3 days, they essentially hove to, using minimal sail to keep the boat stable while making almost no forward progress. It was during this storm that Sarah witnessed the first serious conflict among the crew. Elena and David had a heated argument about engine maintenance procedures, with Elena insisting that David had failed to properly check the cooling system. The argument escalated until Captain Morrison intervened, but Sarah could see that real damage had been done to the trust between 2 key crew members. By the time the second storm passed, the crew had become noticeably more fractured. The easy teamwork of the early weeks had been replaced by a more formal, careful approach to interactions. People were still professional and competent, but the joy had gone out of the voyage. The weather after the second storm was particularly frustrating. Instead of the steady trade winds they expected, they encountered light and variable winds that made progress slow and unpredictable. Dr. Rothwell became increasingly anxious about their slow progress and fuel consumption. Elena's obsessive monitoring of the boat's systems began to reveal minor problems that became sources of stress and debate. David's response was to create increasingly detailed procedures for every aspect of boat operation, instituting new safety protocols that seemed excessive to some crew members. Becca found herself spending more time managing interpersonal conflicts rather than focusing on her primary duties. Sarah began to realize that she was witnessing the psychological breakdown that can occur when highly competent people are placed under sustained stress in an isolated environment. She started keeping a detailed log of their situation, recording not just their position and supplies, but also observations about the psychological state of her companions. On May 8th, 49 days into the voyage, they encountered the weather system that would change everything. Unlike the previous storms, this one developed with terrifying speed. The morning weather forecast had predicted light winds and calm seas. By noon, they were dealing with 30-knot winds and building seas. By evening, they were in the middle of a storm that would have challenged the most experienced sailors in the world. The winds reached sustained speeds of over 60 knots, with gusts exceeding 80. The seas built to heights that Sarah had never imagined possible, with waves that towered over the boat's 58-foot mast. Captain Morrison made the decision to run before the storm, allowing the massive following seas to push them eastward while he fought to keep the boat from broaching. The crisis began at 0300 on May 9th, during Sarah's watch. She was at the helm when she heard the sharp crack of breaking fiberglass. The rudder post had fractured, allowing seawater to flood into the boat through the rudder tube. Elena rushed to start the bilge pumps while David began preparing emergency steering gear, but water was coming in faster than the pumps could handle. As dawn broke on May 9th, Captain Morrison made the decision that every sailor dreads. It was time to abandon ship. The Serenity's Dream asterisk was settling by the stern as the flooding overwhelmed their efforts to control it. The crew moved with practiced efficiency, following procedures they had drilled dozens of times but had never expected. To use the life raft was deployed successfully, and the crew began transferring essential survival equipment. Sarah was among the last to abandon the yacht, helping Dr. Rothwell into the life raft as Captain Morrison made one final check below decks. The life raft, designed to hold 8 people, was crowded with 6. The constant motion was nauseating, and the noise of the storm seemed even louder from water level. Captain Morrison took charge of the raft's organization, establishing watch schedules and rationing procedures for their limited supplies. Elena checked the raft systems. David began plotting their position and calculating drift patterns. and Becca tended to Dr. Rothwell, who seemed to be going into shock. The storm continued for another 18 hours before finally beginning to moderate. By the morning of May 11th, they had established a routine that was necessarily simple but crucial for maintaining morale. Elena had inventoried their supplies and determined that they had enough food and water for approximately 2 weeks if they were very careful with rationing. Dr. Rothwell had recovered somewhat from his initial shock, but he remained the weakest member of the group psychologically. He spent long periods staring at the horizon, occasionally mumbling about his family and the practice he had left behind. On the 4th day in the raft, they spotted their first potential rescue vessel, a container ship passing about 5 miles to the north. Despite firing flares and using every signaling device they possessed, the ship continued without any indication that they had been seen. The disappointment was devastating, particularly for Dr. Rothwell. The psychological dynamics in the raft were complex and constantly evolving. The close quarters meant that privacy was impossible, and every personality quirk was magnified by stress. Dr. Rothwell's pessimism began to affect everyone's morale. Elena's compulsive behavior created tension. David's attempts to maintain discipline sometimes seemed petty. Becca emerged as the group's emotional stabilizer, much as she had been on the yacht. She had an intuitive understanding of what each person needed and when they needed it, somehow managing to keep everyone focused on survival rather than despair. By the end of the first week, their situation had stabilized into a sustainable but increasingly monotonous routine. The emergency beacon continued transmitting, but no rescue had materialized. The physical challenges were becoming more apparent. Constant dampness led to skin problems, limited space made exercise impossible, and the constant hunger and thirst were beginning to affect everyone's judgment. On the 8th day, Elena discovered that one of the water containers had developed a small leak. The news triggered the first serious conflict since they had abandoned the yacht, revealing how precarious their situation really was and how small problems could quickly become large. By the end of the second week, the psychological stress was becoming as dangerous as the physical challenges. Sleep was difficult, tempers were shorter, and people were beginning to hoard small items or be secretive about their activities. On the 15th day, they encountered a severe squall that lasted nearly 6 hours, tossing the raft violently and soaking everyone. Dr. Rothwell, who had been making slow progress in adapting to raft life, suffered what appeared to be a complete breakdown. Becoming convinced they were all going to die and talking about suicide. Captain Morrison, who had been the rock of stability for everyone else, began showing signs of the stress he had been suppressing. Elena's obsessive behavior intensified, and David became more rigid about rules and procedures, trying to create order in a situation that was inherently chaotic. The 3rd week marked a turning point in their condition. The initial hope that had sustained them was gone, replaced by grim determination. Dr. Rothwell's condition continued to deteriorate despite Becca's constant care. The constant hunger and thirst were beginning to affect everyone's cognitive abilities. Elena discovered Dr. Rothwell stealing water during the night of the 20th day, leading to the most serious conflict they had experienced. The incident marked a fundamental shift in the group's dynamics, with trust and mutual support replaced by suspicion and careful monitoring of each other's behavior. On the 24th day, they experienced their second potential rescue opportunity when a fishing vessel passed within 3 miles. Despite firing their remaining flares and using every signaling device, the vessel continued without acknowledgement. The disappointment was devastating, particularly for Dr. Rothwell, who suffered a complete psychological collapse. Elena made a suggestion that horrified everyone, but reflected their harsh reality. Dr. Rothwell was consuming resources that could mean the difference between life and death for the others. The conversation that followed revealed how far they had traveled from the civilized people they had been when they first set sail. Dr. Rothwell died during the night of the 28th day. Becca was with him when his breathing became irregular, and she confirmed he was in the final stages of dehydration and starvation. Captain Morrison conducted a brief service before they committed his body to the sea, but Sarah noticed that the ceremony also marked another shift in group dynamics, with people beginning to calculate who might be next to die. Elena, S paranoia intensified after Dr. Rothwell's death. Convinced that the others were planning to eliminate her next, she started hoarding food and water despite rationing agreements. David became even more controlling, establishing new rules that seemed designed to demonstrate authority rather than improve survival chances. On the 32nd day, Elena discovered that someone had been stealing from the emergency food supplies. The investigation revealed that the thief was Becca, who had been taking small amounts to maintain her strength so she could continue caring for the others. The discovery that their moral center had been stealing food created a crisis that shattered the remaining bonds holding them together. By the 35th day, Sarah realized that the group was disintegrating psychologically. Elena had become openly hostile, accusing the others of plotting against her. David had assumed dictatorial powers, making unilateral decisions. Becca had withdrawn after the theft incident. Captain Morrison was barely functioning as a leader. Sarah found herself becoming the group's de facto leader, not through formal designation, but because she was the only one still capable of thinking clearly about their situation. On the 38th day, Sarah made a discovery that would haunt her forever. While organizing supplies, she found Elena's private journal, which contained detailed observations about each member of the group, including assessments of their likelihood of survival and calculations about how their deaths might benefit the others. Elena had been systematically planning for the elimination of what she considered the weakest members, starting with Dr. Rothwell and continuing with the others. Most shocking was Elena's detailed plan for ensuring her own survival, which included specific methods for eliminating the others if rescue didn't come soon. She had identified the raft's vulnerabilities and developed plans for sabotaging it in ways that would appear accidental while ensuring only she would survive. Sarah realized that Elena had moved beyond normal psychological breakdown and had become actively dangerous to the group's survival. But confronting her directly would likely trigger the violence Elena was planning, while remaining silent would allow her to continue implementing her deadly schemes. On the 40th day, Elena made her move. During the early morning watch, when only Sarah and Captain Morrison were awake, Elena deliberately punctured the raft's main buoyancy chamber using a concealed knife. Her plan was clearly to eliminate the weaker members during the resulting chaos, leaving only herself and possibly Sarah to survive on smaller emergency flotation devices. Sarah saw Elena make the puncture and immediately understood what was happening. In that moment of crisis, with the raft beginning to lose buoyancy and her companions' lives hanging in the balance, Sarah made a decision that would define the rest of her existence. She grabbed the emergency flare gun and fired it directly at Elena from less than 3 feet away. The flare struck Elena in the chest, and the phosphorus ignited her clothing instantly. Elena's screams woke the others, but by the time they realized what was happening, she was already dying from the burns. Elena lived for nearly 6 hours, long enough to confess her plans to eliminate the group and to beg forgiveness from the people she had tried to murder. Her death was agonizing, but it probably saved the lives of everyone else in the raft. Sarah told the others that Elena had been trying to repair a leak when she accidentally triggered the flare gun. It was a lie she knew she would carry for the rest of her life, but it was necessary to maintain group cohesion during their remaining time at sea. With Elena dead, the group's dynamics changed dramatically. David assumed full leadership, but without Elena's technical expertise maintaining. The raft systems became more challenging. Becca emerged from her depression to help manage the crisis, and Captain Morrison found new strength in the face of their desperate situation. Sarah found herself carrying the psychological burden of having committed murder, even though it had been necessary to save her companions' lives. The irony that Eleanor's death had accomplished exactly what she had been planning, improving survival odds through elimination of group members, was not lost on Sarah. By the 42nd day, the 4 survivors had settled into a new routine that was more sustainable than anything they had achieved with the full group. The reduced crowding made life more bearable, and the elimination of Elena's conflict creation allowed the others to cooperate more effectively. On the 45th day, they were finally spotted by a U.S. Coast Guard search aircraft. The rescue was professionally executed, with all 4 survivors being lifted to safety within hours of being spotted. Sarah's rescue was hailed as a miracle of survival and human endurance. The media attention was intense, with reporters fascinated by the story of the young marine biology student who had survived when more experienced sailors had perished. She was careful to stick to the official version of events, describing Elena's death as a tragic accident. The Coast Guard investigation concluded that the loss of the Serenity's Dream asterisk was the result of catastrophic structural failure during extreme weather conditions. Elena's death was ruled accidental, and Dr. Rothwell's death was attributed to the medical challenges of long-term survival at sea. Sarah returned to her studies, but found it impossible to readjust to normal life. The psychological trauma of her experience, combined with the guilt of having killed Elena and the burden of maintaining her lies, made it difficult to form relationships or trust other people. She completed her degree, but became a high school science teacher instead of pursuing the oceanographic career she had planned. For 30 years, Sarah carried the secret of what had really happened during those 47 days. She never married, never had children, and never returned to serious sailing. The weight of her actions had fundamentally changed who she was. The other survivors went on with their lives in various ways. David returned to sailing, but never attempted another major ocean passage. Becca continued nursing, but specialized in trauma care. Captain Morrison retired from sailing and spent his remaining years writing about his experiences, though he never discussed the details of their time in the raft. Sarah's confession came in the form of a handwritten letter discovered among her possessions after her death from cancer at age 59. The letter, addressed to the families of Dr. Rothwell and Elena, contained a detailed account of what had actually happened during their ordeal, including her decision to kill Elena to prevent her from murdering the rest of the group. The letter explained that Elena's mental breakdown had progressed to the point where she had become actively homicidal, planning to eliminate the other survivors to improve her own chances of rescue. Sarah described finding Elena's journal with its detailed plans for murder, and the moment when Elena had punctured the raft in an attempt to create the chaos she needed to implement those plans. Sarah wrote that her decision to kill Elena had been instantaneous and based purely on the need to protect innocent lives. She had no regrets about that decision, but she had carried the burden of deception for 30 years, unable to tell the truth without destroying the peace that the other survivors had found. The revelation of Sarah's confession sent shockwaves through the maritime community and raised profound questions about the nature of survival, morality, and human behavior under extreme stress. The families of Dr. Rothwell and Elena were devastated by the revelations, but also found some closure in finally understanding what had happened to their loved ones. The case raised questions about self-defense, necessity, and the moral choices people make when faced with life or death situations. Maritime safety experts began incorporating Sarah's story into survival training programs, not as an example to follow, but as a warning about the psychological dangers that can emerge during extreme survival situations. Sarah's confession also sparked broader discussions about the nature of survival stories and the tendency to romanticize experiences that are actually brutal and dehumanizing. Her revelation that survival sometimes requires moral compromises that civilized society would find unacceptable, challenged comfortable assumptions about heroism and human nature. The story serves as a sobering reminder that the ocean is not just physically dangerous, but psychologically challenging, in ways that can transform even good people into something unrecognizable. For the sailing community, it became a cautionary tale about the importance of psychological preparation for long voyages and the need to understand that survival at sea might require more than just technical skills and proper equipment. Perhaps most importantly, Sarah's story demonstrates that survival is not always a blessing and that living through a traumatic experience can be just the beginning of a longer struggle with guilt, deception, and the burden of actions taken in desperation. Her 30 years of silence speak to the psychological cost of the choices she made, and her final confession represents an attempt to find peace by finally telling the truth about what it really means to survive when others do not. The revelation that Sarah McKinnon's miraculous survival was built on an act of violence that she concealed for 30 years forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about human nature and the price of survival. Her story stands as one of the most honest accounts of survival at sea ever recorded, stripping away romanticized notions of heroism to reveal the harsh psychological realities of extreme situations. It serves as both a testament to human resilience and a warning about the moral compromises that survival sometimes demands, leaving us to ponder the terrible question of what we ourselves might be capable of when faced with the choice between our own death and the death of another human being.